Hey there. So today we're going to continue from the last segment. Today's segment is called The Many Forms of Fear. The last segment was called The Call for Love. And the one previous to that was, I believe, the guilt, attack, and fear cycle. So we have the guilt, attack, and fear cycle. And then as the next one is, we have learned that fear is, attack is fear, and fear is an unconscious recognition of the love that fear denies. And I thought it makes sense now to talk about the many forms fear takes. And I was thinking about doing it in two sections, or two parts. The first one is that fear can come in many, many, many shapes and many forms, many thoughts, and many emotions. And fear does not look like fear 99% of the time. But everything can be brought back to fear in the end, and that's what we're going to work through in this segment. And once we have established that there is really only one, that many forms of fear are really just one fear, we're going to talk about the realization that we are not afraid of many things either. We're not afraid of heights or spiders or a virus or anything like that. We are only afraid of one single thing, and that is love. So this segment is kind of to boil down a lot of things that we're dealing with every day to two basic things, or basically one thing, the fear of love. And it's, if you imagine 100 different rivers, which are 100 different emotions flowing into one big river, that is fear. And that's what we're going to end up with. So part one, the many forms of fear. We have to kind of go back to the ego's motivation for us. The ego's motivation for us is for us to stick with it, right? We have discussed that before. I envisioned it, because I'm a sci-fi person, I envisioned it as we're on an alien planet with no oxygen. And next to us is a person with an oxygen tank. So we have to convince this person now, by any means necessary, to stay with us so we have the oxygen and we don't die. Right? It's the very same thing with the ego. In order for the ego to survive, it needs us to believe it. And the ego's plan for us to stay with it is simply through fear. Now, Jesus says in the Course, you have but two emotions, love and fear. So that's already the ego's the correction for the ego's tale that says, no, you don't have two emotions, you have hundreds and hundreds of emotions. They're all different, they all have different causes, the bad ones all have different solutions. So let me tell you what those solutions are, and you listen to me and I will take care of you. Obviously, this doesn't work, right? The ego's plan doesn't work. So we are dealing with those hundreds and hundreds of different emotions, feelings, and we're trying to find solutions for it. But if we listen to the ego, we are, as the Course says, the ego's purpose is to seek and do not find. So we will get nowhere if we ask the ego for help to straighten out our emotions or help find solutions for the bad ones. The following paragraph from the chapter 11, section 5, it talks a little bit about the different emotions. It says here, the ego can and does allow you to regard yourself as supercilious, unbelieving, lighthearted, distant, emotionally shallow, callous, uninvolved, and even desperate, but not really afraid. Minimizing fear, but not its undoing, is the ego's constant effort, and is indeed a skill at which it is very ingenious. How can it preach separation without upholding it through fear? And would you listen to it if you recognized this is what it is doing? So the sentence 1 mentions supercilious, which is superior, unbelieving, lighthearted, distant, emotionally shallow, callous, uninvolved, and desperate. Those are just a couple of examples. There are so many more, and I just listed a couple, just thought about a couple more, just to get a little bit of a broader sense of what Jesus is talking about. Careless, jealous, angry, upset, absent-minded, competitive, selfish, controlling, cold, frantic, stressed, and obviously there's many, many more, right? So the ego, and that's really, really interesting, the ego wants us to feel those things, but not identify them as fear. If we were to realize that all of our emotions are only fear, and that fear is only a defense against love, we would be so much closer to making a decision for the ego. Right? That would be the real choice between love and fear. But right now, our choice is between so many different aspects and facets and thoughts about ourselves and others and feelings and emotions that is a smokescreen over us coming back to the choice point between love and fear. If we are constantly busy with thinking about our emotions or trying to solve them in one way or another, we're basically mindless, right? Because we are preoccupied with making distinctions between something that makes no sense, first of all, and is totally unreal. The ego always wants to keep us busy with meaningless things. So I envision fear sometimes as a defensive structure, like you have a medieval castle. And fear is the outer wall, very, very heavy and thick wall around the castle, right? So if fear is the defensive structure around the castle, then the different emotions is a labyrinth inside that massive wall, where anybody that penetrates the wall completely gets lost in it. And I catch myself all the time, we believe our emotions are real, right? And we believe we have to come up with real solutions for that. And one of the aspects of the curriculum of the Course in Miracles is to show us that no, you don't have 100 different emotions, you have but one, which is the one emotion is a defense against another. So you have love and you have fear, which is a defense against love. That's it. There's nothing else. So and Jesus brings us back to that point where we can then realize, wow, okay, so I have a decision between love and fear. Why am I not choosing love? And that is a question that should be the life question for us. But as long as we're thinking about jealousy and that we're distant or emotionally shallow, or we feel callous or uninvolved or desperate or depressed, we can't get to that choice point, to that say, wait a minute, this is not all those emotions, is but one. And I have a choice between this one and the other one, which is love. So the ego tries to make it very, very complicated, and the Course tries to simplify everything for us. Lesson 79 and lesson 80 in the workbook talk about a similar topic. It's slightly different because it talks about problems. We believe we have many problems, and we believe that we need to solve many, many problems, right? But if we are really honest with ourselves and look at the world, we will realize that most of the problems we encounter or the world encounters are made not to be solved. They're made not to be solved. And Jesus urges us in the lesson to recognize that we only have one problem, which is separation, and one solution, which is joining or forgiveness, right? So the same is with our fear and love. We don't have many, many, many emotions. We only have one, and that one is fear. So let's go one step further. It's relatively easy to identify the negative emotions, right? If I feel, let's get a couple of this that Jesus mentions: uninvolved, I feel callous, I feel supercilious, I feel unbelieving, distant, emotionally shallow. Those are relatively easy to identify and say, okay, I can believe Jesus when he says those are fear. It's a little bit of a stretch in the beginning, but okay, I believe you. But what about the positive emotions? The positive emotions add, I'm going to say, if we stay with our labyrinth image, the labyrinth inside the wall around the castle around the castle is fear. The labyrinth inside that castle wall is the many, many emotions. The positive emotions are mirrors inside that labyrinth. So they add another huge layer of defenses. Because if we're honest with ourselves, we are, especially in the beginning of our journey, are motivated more by pain than by love, right? If a situation is too painful for us, we change it. We are having a hard time changing our thinking if we're not motivated by pain. So the positive emotions, happiness, joy, excitement, triumph, things like that, are much harder to recognize as fear. But Jesus says, and that was one, the next two lines that I'm going to read to you, when I read them, they were pretty tough. The first time I read them. So Jesus says, "Be not deceived when madness takes a form you think is lovely. What is intent on your destruction is not your friend." When madness takes a form you think is lovely, positive emotions. Be not deceived. The positive emotions like happiness, joy, special love, which we will have a different separate segment on later on, excitement, triumph, accomplishment, contentment, and such, are also nothing other than fear. And that is a little bit of a hard pill to swallow. We say, no. I mean, the negative emotions, of course, yeah, I get that. But why the positive ones? Why take those away also, right? So let's start with happiness. The Course says, elusive happiness, or happiness in changing form that shifts with time and place, is an illusion that has no meaning. All right, so if we think back at our happy moments, we're happy with somebody, we're happy about having a job, we're happy about making some money, we're happy about overcoming a sickness, we're happy about a visit to a friend. That's all fear? No. And Jesus says, yes, and the reason why he's telling us that is in the sentence, elusive happiness or happiness in changing form that shifts with time and place is an illusion that has no meaning. You have to realize that we don't want peace, right? We're afraid of it, we don't want it. So we look for peace that is not eternal. We look for peace that changes, that has grades and shades, and that shifts. And if something on the outside happens, the peace is being taken away. If something good happens, it comes back to us. So we don't care for the eternal peace, the never-changing peace. We want the changing, shifting peace. And Jesus says, as long as any happiness is based on anything external, a partner, a nice life, a new car, wealth, family, etc., it is in truth fear. And why he says that is because he says, hold on, I'm going to do that in a little bit. I jumped ahead a slight bit. So the word happiness can also be exchanged in this line, elusive happiness or happiness in changing form. Elusive happiness or elusive love, elusive joy, elusive contentment, elusive peace in changing form that shifts with time and place is an illusion and has no meaning. So I think it's important for us to realize that all the positive, quote-unquote, positive emotions are in truth also fear. And see, if the ego would only give us fear, we would right away say, listen, this is too much pain. I'm going to decide. There must be another way. And once we have that moment of there must be another way, we will find it, right? Because we are in charge. We just gave the ego the power. So the ego wants us to have many forms of fear, not one fear, right? It also doesn't want us, we can't see that the longing, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but it doesn't matter. The longing in us for our home, for God, for love, for peace is so strong that the ego has to give us positive emotions. They are not real, but it has to give them to us, because otherwise, again, we would go back and say, listen, buddy, I'm going to go with this other guy. This is changing, this is not good. But we don't see it. And the course, the biggest goal of the course is for us to see what we're doing, see what's going on in our mind, right? Expose the ego in its absolute detail so that we can make an informed decision against it at some point. Disclaimer. This does not mean we should not try to be happy or joyful, or each time we experience joy, we're like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually fear, and oh, this is the defense against love, and your joy isn't fear, is only fear, and we're bringing other people down, we're bringing ourselves down. It is absolutely not the case, right? Jesus doesn't ask us to change anything. Really, what he asks us is to look at it, to see what we're really asking for. That's really all he asks, and that is in itself already a big deal. So his goal for us is to very slowly and gently lead us to a completely different kind of experience. But in order to experience his peace, he has to tell us, hey, just look at the peace that you have with anything external, and tell me really honestly, has this fulfilled you? That's really all he asks. And if we're very honest, we have to say no. Has happiness brought us joy that lasts? Any relationship, anything outside in the world, has that brought us happiness that lasts? And the answer, the true answer, if we're honest, is no. And Jesus says here, I'm leading you to a new kind of experience that you will become less and less willing to deny. Right now we're denying the experience of his peace, and we're substituting it with the ego's peace that is not eternal and that is based on the outside. And if it's not eternal, if it doesn't last, it's fear. So the experience that Jesus wants us to lead us to is completely independent of the outside world, right? We can be at peace in a packed subway, in a very high tension meeting. We can be at peace as a soldier in a war. We can be at peace in prison. We can be at peace with an illness. The goal for Jesus, for us, is to become independent of the outside world, not detached in a way that we will be, what we say, elusive, right? Or distant, emotionally shallow. That's not the case. We would be more present, way more present to everybody around us, if we were to take Jesus' hand and accept his peace or his love for us. So if Jesus is a car salesman, right? And he wants to sell us a new car, he has to first make us realize that the old car is garbage, right? What we're driving is completely falling apart, and all the shiny little parts don't make for a good ride, right? Once we realize that our car is stuck in first gear, the engine is revved up, the brake is locked, it's in the shop constantly, it's basically held together by duct tape and spit, faith maybe, then we can say, he's driving next to us with his car, and he says, just look at my car, get out of your car for a couple of minutes. You don't have to abandon it, right? You don't have to abandon the ego thought system, but come sit in my car for a little bit. Comfy chairs, the seats, they're like seated, heated seats, and the ride is smooth, and the ride is never in traffic. The ride is always, there's a sunset in the distance, there's a mountain range, it smells great, there's no roof, the stars at night, it's balmy, it's beautiful. That's what basically he wants for us. But he just says, get out of your car for a minute. You can go right back in. And the more we have that contrast between his car and our car, the more we realize, whoa, I made a wrong choice, But he has to first tell us, or we have to first realize that our car, as shiny as we think it is a very bumpy ride. And one of the ways of doing this is for us to realize all the emotions we have are but one emotion. And he says here, recognize only that the ego's goal, which you have pursued so diligently, has merely brought you fear. And it becomes difficult to maintain that fear is happiness. So that's the process with the Course, is to make us come back to our mind constantly, come back, and look at what the ego is doing. Look at all those emotions that you think you have, and realize that they are only one, they are only fear. And that fear you're using as a massive defense mechanism against my love. So I want to read to you something that is a little bit of what Jesus says. Listen, ride my car for a couple of minutes. Come with me. I'll take you on a ride. You will leave the other car here. We'll leave the ego here. Take a ride with me. I'll drop you back off in a couple of minutes, and you can go on your way. He says, listen, Perhaps you catch a hint of an ancient state, not quite forgotten. Dim perhaps, and yet not altogether unfamiliar, like a song whose name is long forgotten and the circumstances in which you heard completely unremembered. Not the whole song has stayed with you, but just a little wisp of a melody attached not to a person or a place or anything familiar, particular. But you remember from just this little part how lovely was the song, how wonderful the setting where you heard it, and how you loved those who were there and listened with you. That's from chapter 21, section 1. We kind of, the thing is, when we look at the ego for a while, what I realize is we drown in false emotions, right? Good or bad. We're constantly shifting throughout the day into different emotions, and we can really never get rid of the bad ones for long, and we can't keep the good ones either. We have to basically switch between the good ones to keep a steady flow of hope, and we have to try to get rid of the bad ones, right? And that's basically our day. So as a solution for this first part, Jesus does not tell us to change anything, right? He just says, look at them with me. Look at them with me. Look at all those emotions that you have, the good ones and the bad ones, and look at them with me, and you realize that they're all fear, and they're only a defense against my love. That's it. It makes everything very simple. You know, we're not callous. We're just afraid of his love. We're not emotionally distant. We're just afraid of love, right? If we, I'm going to get to that a little bit, what I wanted to say now. So, part 2, the fear of love. So, we have said that the ego's motive is to divert our attention from the real problem, right? From the real issue. All those many emotions that we have are a diversion of the one emotion that they actually are, fear. Now, a similar thing happens with what we're afraid of. We think we are afraid of, and I'm just gonna list a couple of things. We think we are afraid of war, of sickness, of abandonment, of poverty, of starvation, of earthquakes, the stock market crashing. We're afraid of viruses. We're afraid of other people. We're afraid of other countries. We're afraid of the left, the right, the president, the Nazis, the liberals, the police, black people, white people, spiders, terrorists, propane tanks, neighbors, guns, not having guns, and so on. The list is literally endless. The list of the items we're afraid of is endless. And if we think we're not afraid, Jesus says, think again. Because if you wouldn't be afraid, you would be at home in heaven. So if we're not in 100% peace that encompasses everybody and feel the love that is all-encompassing, that includes everybody, we're not at peace, which means we are afraid. So in general, we believe that something is going to happen in the future, right? We're afraid of something happening in the distant future or in the very near future, even seconds later. And here's what Jesus has to say. He says, it's so clear. It says, future loss is not your fear. Present joining is your dread. Future loss is not your fear. Present joining is your dread. And that's in chapter 26, section 8. It's such a clear and compelling thought, even though it makes us think really hard about our life, right? This corrects the ego's belief that we are afraid of anything on the outside. Anything. Just with the many forms of fear that we just previously did, we can substitute the word future loss, or the phrase future loss, with anything. For example, future loss, or war is not your fear. Death is not your fear. A virus is not your fear. Spiders are not your fear. Other people are not your fear. Earthquakes are not your fear. Being robbed is not your fear. In other words, we are never, ever, ever afraid of the future. We're also never afraid of the past repeating itself in the future. We are afraid of this very moment, right now. Right now, this moment is what we're afraid of. This timeless instant where we can, for one moment, let go of the ego and choose again. That's the fear. That is the whole fear of the ego, is losing us as support. You know, it's like the guy with the oxygen tank on the alien planet. We are so afraid of losing that oxygen. The ego is so afraid of losing us. That's why it says you're afraid of everything and anything. Throughout the day, you turn on the news. I mean, you name it, we're afraid of it, right? We're afraid to join with Jesus now. We're afraid to join with the Holy Spirit now. We're afraid to go back to God now. We're not afraid to have no money tomorrow or to die. We're not afraid of death. We are afraid to join with Jesus now, at this very moment. How crazy is that, right? We're never afraid of another person. We're afraid of joining with the other person. We're afraid of the love that is between us. So as we look at this with Jesus, all those different things we are seemingly afraid of, right? As we look at all this and how it plays out in our lives, how it affects us, how we are so involved with this constantly. We have the fear, then we build defenses. We have the fear, we have to build defenses. That's our day, right? And we slowly, very slowly with the Course, with help of the Course, because we are afraid of God, and everything else everything is a smokescreen against that. We come to the conclusion, and it says here, the Son of God at war with his Creator, which is us being afraid of love, is a condition as ridiculous as nature roaring at the wind in anger, proclaiming it is part of itself no more. So nature being angry at the wind would be the same as God at war with us. So the whole reason of the fear of love is completely and utterly made up. And the process of the Course is to realize that. To realize that everything we're dealing with in our mind, whatever goes through our mind on a daily purpose, are those feelings, emotions, thoughts about others, worries about the future, regrets about the past. How am I going to solve this problem and that problem? How am I going to take care about this person? What about that person? And the news and everything that we encounter every day is a massive defense strategy against love. That's it. There's nothing else to it. And if we can see that, if we through the course, through reading this and applying it into our lives, can identify those emotions. I'm jealous. Just identify it with Jesus. Ask for help. Realizing that this is fear. I'm afraid. Right? I'm not emotionally distant. I'm afraid. Right? People aren't callous. They're afraid. They have the same fear that we have. And that fear that we all, so basically in all those emotions that we have, we are separate from others, right? For example, I'm jealous and somebody else is emotionally distant. That makes us separate because the other person isn't jealous for me. The other person is emotionally distant. I'm jealous. If I'm afraid and the other person is afraid, that joins us, right? If we can recognize fear in the other person's behavior, we will also learn to recognize this in our own behavior and in our thoughts. This is it for today. The next chapter is going to be how forgiveness plays into all of this with the many forms of fear. Forgiveness and fear, the healing, the undoing of fear are going to come together next time. Thanks for watching.